Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I've been thinking a lot about productivity and finding stuff to do over the last couple of months. I'm very good at having grand ideas and then not delivering, but I also look around at my friends in the gaming space and see the content that they're passionately producing. And I want to find a bit more of that of my own because I think I've lost that in recent years. So that's why we're here today, partly. And we're also here today to talk about Metro 2033. So I've been having a think over the last few weeks and I want to dust the cobwebs off of this channel and start to get a bit more content out. Part of that, amongst other things, is that I want to find a way to offer a comment on the games I complete this year. So I'm going to fiddle about with that, as well as some formats in the coming months, and hopefully settle on something that allows me to get videos up in a way that I find fun, but also in a way that's hopefully interesting to watch and listen to. And if not, then at least a format that I think I can make interesting so that I can toddle off and cultivate a voice to make it more interesting over time. It's this bit I like, the writing, recording, and less the editing. So let's give it a go and see how I get on. And hopefully some people will come along with me on the journey. Anyway, I played Metro 2033 and I have some thoughts. Let's go.
I was just an infant when the old world was destroyed in the flames of nuclear fire. I, along with 40,000 others, were saved by retreating to the metro stations deep under the city. Now, 20 years have passed, and going up into the embrace of an endless winter was left to a few brave souls.
Returning to Metro 2033 in 2025 is an interesting proposition given the current political climate in which we currently find ourselves. Back in 2010 when this was released, and then again in 2024 when Metro 2033 Redux was released, and this was the version I played, the days of near perpetual nuclear threat looming over the Western world throughout the Cold War was quickly becoming a distant and otherworldly memory. Fast forward to the year of our Lord 2025, and the stirrings around the invasion of Ukraine and the putrid waves of populism that we see sweeping across democratic nations around the globe, and these uncertain times that we had hoped had been consigned to the history books suddenly seem much more vivid and real, and media that was once an interesting form of escapism can suddenly take on a dramatically different tone. Enter Metro 2033. Now, don't get me wrong here, I'm not sitting typing this out about to make some grand statement about Metro 2033 and claim that it will change your life. Metro 2033 is ostensibly a mostly competent experience that is entertaining enough in its own right without pulling up any trees. Redux fixes a lot of the problems players encountered in the original release, but there are still bits and pieces of design choices baked into its actual DNA that will remind you of an era of games that are, unlike the themes in this game, very much consigned to history books, most notably rearing its head around the game's protagonist Artyom. The story centres around an event that forces Artyom on a journey across Moscow to deliver a message. The problem with that is that he's completely mute. Without character development or voice acting in any way, there's nothing. I can't help but think that choosing someone a little more, let's say, talkative would have been a better choice when the explicit goal is to impart information once you get to a destination, something that Artyom is apparently completely incapable of doing. The story of Metro 2033 roughly follows the events from Dmitry Glukhovsky's novel of the same name. It takes place in the year of shock, 2033, 20 years after a global nuclear holocaust took place that turned Moscow into a wasteland filled with killer mutants and irradiated an uninhabitable air. This forced survivors underground to eke out an existence in the Moscow's labyrinthine metro subway systems. During the 20 years following the disaster, metro stations slowly became self-governing sort of towns in their own right, each run and governed by different groups and doctrines, and as always, the Stalinists, or communists in this case, slip into a perpetual, never-ending war with the Nazis. After his home station is attacked by a new enemy known only as the Dark Ones, Artyom is asked to deliver a message to a distant station known as Polis, in the hope that he will be able to get some support and then come back to drive the Dark Ones out and deal with them once and for all. This kickstarts a dangerous and arduous journey through the underground and across the surface of Moscow, where he faces monsters along the way, and as is often the case with stories such as this, the humans are very much as dangerous and vicious as the monsters themselves. As I've previously mentioned, the story is absolutely fine. It's interesting because it's set around the events of a popular novel, but if you're coming to this purely for the story, then the book does a far better job of creating a setting and set of characters that are compelling and interesting to interact with. What this does instead then is faithfully recreate a destroyed and desolate world filled with threats around every corner. One moment you'll be running from your life from monsters that will want to rip you limb from limb. The next, you're creeping quietly past a patrolling group of Nazis as you try and often fail to navigate the stations without being spotted. A particular highlight in this regard comes when you find yourself in the front line of a Nazi communist war that continues to ravage the world even after a nuclear holocaust. And your goal is to get yourself from the Stalinist side over to the Nazi side, with both groups under the impression that you're a spy from each side. If you can remain undetected long enough to listen into conversations between the soldiers, you learn about a group of men with families of their own fighting because their superiors have told them to, many of them seemingly aware of the frailties of their own side's moral position. Another interesting moment presents itself when you enter a library looking for a map. Within the library are these unique monsters that you don't see anywhere else, known as librarians. At several points throughout the level, you're presented with an opportunity to shoot at these monsters, but if you avoid this, when eventually you come face to face with them, you have an opportunity to stare them down as they roar and threaten you. If you don't shoot them and you hold your ground, they will often settle down and walk away without attacking, changing what might be for some a frantic dash around a building, desperately trying to outrun a pursuing monstrosity, hell-bent and folding you up like a post-it note, into a tense atmospheric standoff, threatening to boil over at any moment if you put a foot out of line. It's really interesting, these monsters, because, and the reason I've sort of picked them out is because they really feel like silverback gorillas to me. I think we've all probably seen those memes and videos of the gorillas like running out and showing themselves big. They move around like big silverbacks, and sometimes you'll be moving around the library and they'll come running up behind you and push you out the way and then run off and carry on going. And this often can sort of instigate a fight, but if you sort of hold your ground and don't fire or rise to it, they'll sort of run off and they'll maybe come back and you can tell they're watching you, and they'll carry on with their routes around the building. But if you just don't kickstart a fight, they'll largely stay calm, maybe give you a couple shoves and knock you over and do the odd bit of injury. But for the most part, yeah, they stay out of your way. It's really interesting that if you do decide to fight these guys, because you can do it and you can beat them and you can kill them and you can get through the area having gone full guns blazing, which is fun and it's difficult and it's a challenge and rewarding in that way. However, you'll come out with no ammo, meaning that you've got to go to the next stage of the game with very low ammo, or ammo for a gun that you don't want to use very much. So it really is a risk reward. I think there's a lot of this risk reward attempted in the game, but this is one example where they really pull it off. That said, there are also moments where the game falls completely flat on its face. It often does a poor job of explaining itself, and many players will find that they might complete the game or get very deep into the game without engaging in what can be very key mechanics. There was one instance in which I was convinced my night vision goggles were bugged, for example, with my character pulling them off every time I tried to put them on. It wasn't until I was on the last level that I discovered online that this wasn't a bug, but simply that my battery had run out of power and I needed to recharge it, a mechanic that the game never explained to me at any point. Players will also be left feeling like there were a few opportunities that were missed during development. In the early preview days, it was claimed that there would be a mechanic in the game that blended bullets and currency, with bullets doubling up as ammunition for your gun and also the currency that you would use to purchase equipment and upgrades. This would force players to weigh up each battle that they entered into, with every missed shot representing a real and tangible loss to the player. Unfortunately, though, I found that the game, for the most part, dispensed with this type of thing. It did keep certain types of bullets as currency that could be shot in theory, but for the most part, they don't actually offer any sort of real risk reward to the player. Sadly, this does feel like a bit of a missed opportunity, changing what would have potentially been a tense, high-stakes FPS leaning heavily on stealth, instead turning it into another run-of-the-mill run-and-gun shooter, with very little consequence for shunning the stealth and turning into a one-man army, wreaking havoc everywhere you go. The world of Metro 2033 should feel harsh, dangerous, and unforgiving, but all too often it's you, the player, that embodies this threat more than the world itself. Sure, there are multiple endings based on your willingness to not blow everything up in sight, but again, I found that the story gave me very few, if any, reasons at all to feel sympathy for any of the characters during the game, so opting to kill everyone never really felt like an immoral decision. Thankfully, though, for those that want to engage with the stealth mechanics in their own right, Metro 2033 Redux comes with a fully reworked enemy AI system and control system. The original game was dull, clunky, and unfairly harsh with enemy detection codes. Thankfully, in Redux, the development team brought the work put into the sequel Metro Last Light and worked it into Metro 2033. This makes it the de facto version of the game, giving it a modern, responsive, and fairer feel that the original version lacked. In all honesty, it's these changes that for me mean it's a game that can be given a highly qualified recommendation. The original game was a clunky, buggy mess that fumbled its storytelling enough times that it wasn't worth battling with at all. Redux does change that, turning the game into a competent but unremarkable shooter that can at times offer glimmers of promise as we see the shape of the ideas that developers were attempting to bring into the player. When it plays its cards right, it's a dark, atmospheric game that offers a brilliant commentary into the futility of war and the endless looping battles, both real and in the rhetoric, that both the political right and left subject us to, when in reality they are both as morally bankrupt as one another, and setting this into a backdrop filled with monsters and big guns that we all know and love as a vehicle to make their larger point makes this game fun to play and allows them to get their messages across. Unfortunately though, the game is let down by what seems like a lack of conviction to see some big ideas through to completion. What this results in is a watered down experience that could have and should have been so much more than the bog standard middle of the road game that we ended up with. Metro, I can't help but feel that you could have been so much more.